In this video, we're going to talk about organization. We're going to start with file organization. So here I have a project, Scott Phillips Ad, that is not named very well. And so I'm going to jump in here and I'm going to give you some more insights on how to be able to take a project and make sure it's named correctly. So first off, I'm going to look here, and at the filming date, we've got June 1st, 2017. So I'm going to date stamp this very first to where this is June, well, it's 2017, June, and it's the 1st. So that's how we date stamp. First two numbers of the year, middle two numbers are the month, last number is the day of the month that this was filmed. That's the best way to stick with it, is when it was filmed, to stay organized. Then after that, the next important thing is the client name needs to be in there if we're working on a client project. So Scott Phillips is the name of the client, and then this is his ad. It could be more descriptive, like we could say Facebook ad. That's a good project title and situation. So that's the way it should appropriately be named. Now let's go into the file structure. I'm going to add a bunch of folders here. 01 raw footage. I'm going to take these two folders and put them in there. 02 edits. 03 audio. 04 export. Well, actually I'm going to change that to graphics. And 05 export. Now, why did I order them the way that I did? I prefer to use numbers because then that forces the order that these appear in the files when I'm looking at them. So that's the reasoning behind it. If there is a different organization that you prefer for a particular reason, please let me know and we can see if that works. But for now, this is the organization I like. I like having the raw footage very first because that typically is what comes into the folder very first. And then edits is the next thing you typically set up. Then you start adding audio to your edits, and then you start adding graphics to your edits, and then finally you export out the final file. So this follows the progression of a typical project that you work on. Now, these numbers do not always need to be these exact numbers. I just put them in as the progression of the project. So in other words, 05 export, it may be 09 export for certain projects, and that's completely fine. So don't get caught up on the numbers. Just as you add these folders in there, put them in place. Now in the raw footage section, I don't do too much organization in here because you'll do the rest of it inside Premiere. However, if you'd like to, in this case, like we had two different filmings. We had this filming during this time, and this was actually filming with iPhone, filming with smartphone. And this is his testimonial. So those are, sorry, not to confuse you, these are two different filming sessions and have two different sets of footage. All right, so now I would put my Premiere file in the edits folder, and then as I start working with audio, as I have a chosen audio file, I'd put it in here, or if I'm pulling down some scratch files, like ones that I'm testing out, I'd put those in here. And then graphics, as I work on graphic projects, I would duplicate files and put them in here, create any graphics I needed and put them in here, and that way the project can be used wherever. If I come in here to edits and open this up, as long as I relink it back to these files, all the files will be in here so that this project can be re-rendered if chosen. Then export, what that means is this is the exported final files, or excuse me, not always the final ones, but these are the exported files. And then with these, we always need to indicate if something is which version. So let me show you what I mean by that. Now let's come into the Premiere file, and I'll show you how to best organize your Premiere file. I always like to work in versions. So you'll notice when I name this, I'm going to do a V1 next to it. That means this is whatever the project name is, version 1. And that way, as you continually touch this project, if you touch it again, then you'll change it to version 2 and version 3. That way you can best keep track of this, keep track of the progress. So I'm going to change my location to actually be this Scott Facebook, and I'm going to change it to edits is my location for this, and I'm going to call it basically the same thing, Scott Phillips Facebook ads. Now you don't really need to, I'm doing a shorter version just because the client's not going to see this, but it's good to keep it descriptive so you know which one you're working on. Now notice I did V1, that means version 1. We're starting out from the very beginning. I'm going to import my footage, and for now I'm just going to do this side of things and import that in here. It may take it just a second while it does that. While it's doing that, I'm going to talk about some other things here. The other things I want to say is, as you work through your edits, right here we have version 1. The next time you come in and touch this and work on it, so we would then change that to version 2. So even if that's between days. So let's say you start the project, you get assigned this project, you start working on it, and you work on it for a few hours and the day ends. Well, that's version 1, save that. Next day when you come back in, when you open that file again, save as, and change it to version 2, and then work on it. Same thing as if we send to the client a version to look at, and they come back and say they wanted a couple changes, or you send it to a project manager and they say they need to have some changes. That's another time where you then come in and change it to the next version. So don't be afraid to add multiple versions. This is also good too if you start going down a pathway where you're like, I'm making some significant changes to this piece. Maybe I'll add another version or create another version just in case I need to come back to this one. Go ahead and make another version. That's what they're there for. If a file ever gets corrupted for whatever reason, we can usually come back to a version and start, instead of starting from scratch, start from a different spot there. So that's very important, is to use versions. The audio files, when you download preview music, put that in here. Graphics file, when you have graphics like logos, icons, other graphics you're pulling from a communal folder, even a motion graphic file that we use as a template, copy it and put it in here, and that way you can reference it and change it and update it. With exports, if a project merits to have multiple rounds of drafts, it's not always the case, put old drafts inside a folder inside here. So you'd call it like old clips, old cuts, or old exports. And then when you put new ones, the new ones stay in this main folder, the old ones get moved then to the old cuts. All right, looks like it's done uploading that. Okay, now the next section, and we're not going to look too much into the footage, but the next part of what we do is we need to create folders inside here. First, we need to create an A-roll folder, and that is going to consist of our talking videos. I'm just going to say that's my first 5 here. So these are my talking videos, so when someone's talking to the camera, they're narrating the video. That's my A-roll. It's just them looking at the camera typically. That's great. B-roll then is all the other stuff where we're getting shots that are going to go on top of the A-roll. Oh, come on, don't do this to me. Hate it when it does that. There we go. And I'm going to take the rest of my clips and I'm just going to put it inside my B-roll. Okay. Cool. Now I've got my A-roll and my B-roll. I usually also create one graphics for when I'm going to pull my graphic files in here, and I also usually create sequences. All right, the best way, typically when you have, oh, that's where the new bin came from. Let's delete that. Oh no, can't see it. Let's delete that. When it comes to starting out a project, usually you look at the A-roll, create a new sequence, name that sequence the name of the file, so in this case Scott's Facebook ad, and then move that down to sequences. The reason for that is usually that will give you the right kind of settings that you need for your video, that you won't have to go through and pick a template. From there, our typical projects, just so you are aware, come to sequence settings. Our typical projects are 1920 by 1080 at 29.97. That's just typically what it is. It's not always, but that's typically what it is. Often when you bring in a footage file like the A-roll, it will be in UHD or 4K resolution, and you'll just need to change to the 1920 by 1080. We downscale everything at a 16.9 ratio. We downscale it to usually 1920 by 1080 is what we typically work on. Now, however, when we're working on Facebook ads that will only go digital, for whatever reason, if the client films only in 1920 by 1080 or lower, we will do 720. And that's because that's what Facebook accepts right now, and YouTube's the same. Even though YouTube will accept 4K, That's usually what we will downgrade to if we need to. And the reason for that is if we have footage that was shot in 1920 by 1080 and we decide that we want to crop in. If we decide that, then we will do 720. And we'll typically do that for digital ads, but not for main high-end pieces that we're sending to bigger clients. So keep that in mind. The thing I want to emphasize here is do the same kind of organization that was done here. So like you're going to bring in your audio files. Well, why not create a new bin and call it audio? Great. That way these are really well organized and you know where to grab stuff that you need. If you're doing multiple sequences, you've got them in here. If you've got lots of graphic files you're playing, you've got them there. So I highly recommend that you stick with the organization that I'm showing you right here. Let me show you one other thing, and I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to do this real quick. Let me just say, actually I've got an example. This is the other thing that I recommend as well. When it comes to graphics, and you're choosing to use After Effects for doing some graphic overlays, which is a great way of doing things, a little bit more complex sometimes. What I recommend is doing your edits where you cut up your video. You've got all these different cuts here. You've got some of your A-roll footage, your B-roll footage on top, or let's just grab a quick little scene here. And we're just putting these things over top. Obviously, this is not me working on an actual project. Once you've got your sequence all done, and it's 33 seconds here, then I recommend exporting this out as just a reference file. Don't do any color correction to it. Don't do any of that kind of stuff. Just render it out. You know you've got the video and the audio the way you want. It cuts pretty well in your mind. Good. Now export that out and then take that into After Effects. Now when you're in After Effects, so I'm going to pause the video and I'm going to segment this into a second video for you to see this.